All right, let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the final of our 4 Supporting the Travel Industry webinar series. I am Scott Halstead, and on behalf of the Destinations Travel and Leisure team, I want to thank you for taking the time today to join us. We understand that the travel industry is dealing with many issues, so our team surveyed thousands of travel professionals to see what topics are most important to discuss. This webinar series covers COVID-19 related topics in marketing, and sales and consumer behavior. To see the full list of all of our discussions, please visit our website at thedestinationshow.com. That is thedestinationshow.com. I want to thank our partners, Austin Adventures, Jack's Facts Travel Marketing, Outdoor Writers Association of America, Travel Business Success, and Wonderful. Before we get started, let's set the stage. Our host will be discussing the travel sentiments and expectations in the fallout of COVID-19. All your cameras and microphones are blocked, but we do encourage you to ask questions right inside the little chat box provided. So let me introduce our speaker, Amir Eylon. So Amir is with Longwoods International Amir. He's with Longwoods International and is a marketing research consultancy that specializes in the travel and tourism industry. And that you all work with many destination travel brands. Early into this crisis, we came across some new research you all were doing to help guide the travel industry. So Amir, can you tell us a little bit about the research? And we'd love to see some highlights from what you have been learning over the past 3 months.
Yeah, well, thank you, Scott, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. It's a pleasure and honor to be here today. I will jump right in and show you a little bit of the findings of what we learned. So let's start to share here. Here we go. All right, so quick agenda. I'll give you highlights of our latest travel sentiment research, talk a little bit about what we've been seeing over the last 3 months, and then translate that into some key takeaways for you when you're looking ahead into recovery as we begin reopening and the industry starts its path towards bouncing back. And then we'll obviously have plenty of time for Q&A at the end there. And I will let Scott moderate the chat box, and he'll feed questions as you have there, so feel free to ask. All right, let's kick it right in. So So a little bit about Longwoods International. As Scott said, we are a market research consultancy that specializes in travel and tourism. One of the things that we've been doing for well over 35 years is hosting something called Travel USA. Travel USA is the largest and longest running study of traveling US households. Every year we document somewhere between 300 to 350,000 trips taken by Americans. And we find out everything about their recent travels and activities, from how they plan their trips, how much they spend, where they go, activities, you name it. And when this crisis was starting to hit our shores here in the US, we realized that it's not just important to talk to folks about the recent travels, but we need to get a pulse check for the industry on how this coronavirus will be impacting their intent to travel down the road. And so we were able to do this in partnership with our friends at Miles Partnership. Through their sponsorship and support, they've been able to make this data, allow us to make this data available for free to the industry every week. So every Tuesday morning, we are able to release this data for you. So I'm going to show you data that's literally fresh off the presses. We just released it yesterday morning. This is the 12th wave of this survey. Every week we go into our panel and we talk to 1,000 adults ages 18 and older, representative sample of the US, and so we get a cross section of the country, and we are able to share these highlights with you. So let's jump right into the data. So this past week, 75% of American travelers that were planning to travel in the next 6 months told us that they either already have or are in the process of changing their travel plans due to the coronavirus. As you can see, about 47% have canceled their trip completely. About 47% have reduced their travel plans in some form or fashion. Could be, the week or 2 week trip taken, being cut down to a series of weekend getaways, etc. But the most common type of change is right now that we're seeing is changing from a destination that I have to fly to one that I can drive to. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And of course, there's still a little bit that are changing their trips from international to domestic at this point, with the borders, for the most part being closed. There's just not to close non-essential travel. There's just folks are now trying to cancel their fall trips abroad and so forth in there. So moving forward, the beauty of having done this for 12 weeks now is that we've got a 3-month trend line, so we can kind of see how things are going. If you look back to way back on the left there, March 11th, when we first did our survey, only 58% told us that they're in the process or have changed their plans due to the coronavirus. You can see that in early April, around April 8th, we peaked at 85%. And it's kind of been directionally very slowly heading back down in the right direction, but we have a long way to go, clearly. In terms of the trends of those canceling their travel and reducing their travel plans, well, it was cancellation first until about 3 weeks ago. And then 3 weeks ago, we saw the volume of those who are just reducing their plans and changing them in some form fashion versus canceling start to exceed those who are canceling. Again, it kind of leveled off a little bit this past week, but that's well within the margin of error, usually a plus or minus 2% margin of error. So it's pretty. So what we're seeing here again is a positive ray of light here, in the fact that more people are opting to change their plans versus cancel them completely. And then, as you can see, there's been a high volume of those changing from flying destinations to drive destinations. When we look ahead to recovery, that's going to benefit regional drive markets, of course. And we'll talk more about folks' intent to drive in just a little bit. And again, international travel, pretty much all of it's been canceled, except for the stuff was maybe pushed back toward the fall now. So people are continuing to change that last remaining residual. Every week, we ask folks about key factors that would impact their decision to travel in the next 6 months. And we've been measuring these same factors here from week 1. First of all, on the bottom there, the transportation cost, you can see not really factoring heavy into the decision to travel in the next 6 months. Obviously, gas prices have gone down. And, if you've looked at airfares, generally speaking, or other other costs of travel, there's a lot of obviously great deals available right now for those who are able to travel. Concerns about the economy, as you can see, only 22% are telling us that it would greatly impact their decision to travel in the next 6 months. We'll talk about that trend here momentarily. And then, of course, the 500-pound gorilla in the room is that 47% of traveling Americans are telling us that the fear of coronavirus it will greatly impact their decision to travel in the next 6 months. Now, again, looking at the trend lines, when we started on March 11th, with only just one third of Americans, 35% there, and we peaked on April 1st at 67%. Very happy to report, you can see we're down to 47%. So we've seen a 20-point drop in the last 2 months here, directionally trending in the right direction. But you can see we're still not quite where we were at the beginning of this crisis here on our U.S. shores. But that is definitely a very positive move here. So next slide. Oops, there we go. The economy. This is really interesting. At first it surprised us a little bit, and then it kind of all made sense. As you can see, for the most part throughout this whole study, the concerns about the economy, the concerns about my personal pocketbook to travel, to have the budget to travel, really has never exceeded 25%. It's remained somewhere around 22, 23. It's kind of an average through this whole thing. There's a couple factors here, all mixing together, compressing that fear, that factor of the economy. First of all, it is because the fear of coronavirus is so high. I mean, it's just under 50%, as I just showed you. It's still very high at people. It's still about whether or not I am going to travel for many, many people. Then they'll worry about the money later. But also, because transportation costs are so low, deals are so low, and there's this big pent-up demand, which we'll talk about here in a moment, of people to travel. People just want to get away. They need to get away. So they're not as concerned about that. And you've seen that there's such a high volume of people changing from long-haul destination travel to a perhaps shorter-haul regional drive market type of travel, that the costs associated with that typically are not as high as, all the airfare and other costs there. That, if I'm taking my car versus renting a car, and all these other factors in there, and they tend to be shorter getaways anyway. So not as a big hit on the pocketbook from that perspective. And of course, we ask this every week. We ask the $64,000 question: are you going to travel in the next 6 months? Again, March 11th, 87% of traveling Americans said absolutely, I'm hitting the road on this thing. We kind of bottomed out. The good news is we never went below 2/3 of traveling Americans, so that was healthy. 65% there on April 1st, and most recently, as you can see, we've been hovering around the 70-71% mark the last few weeks here there. And again, we wish that was trending back up a little faster, a little higher, but that's still over 70% of Americans say they're going to travel in the next 6 months, which tells us there is that pent up ball of demand in there. Every week on this survey, it's a short survey. It's about 10 questions long. About 8 of the questions are pretty much the same week after week. Every week we add 1 or 2 kind of questions that we, based on the timing and what else we see going on in the marketplace, we'll rotate some questions out. And here are some questions we've asked in recent weeks, and we want to show you a few things here that we think will be of interest to this audience. We asked the question a couple times recently about what type of information and content is of interest to travelers. There, and you can see that deals and offers for travel, dining, and entertainment for future use is of great interest to folks. They're definitely looking for deals, so when they can travel again, they want that. Obviously, a lot of destinations started pivoting as we kind of went into lockdown mode about helping provide local dining information for carry-out, curbside delivery, food, and so forth. So that was very valuable too. But definitely that deals and offers for future use is important there. And of course, ways to support local businesses and organizations there. But you can also see that what a lot of folks in the industry have done in terms of offering virtual tours, live streams of local musicians and artisans, all kinds of interesting and inspiring travel videos, and so forth, 360 images, and that all are of value to the consumer. So many of you have handled this very correctly by putting out a lot of that content that you've banked up. So just to help keep people inspired to travel, because just because they couldn't travel doesn't mean they weren't dreaming about travel. And next slide. We've asked also the question about what type of travel content have these folks viewed or interacted with in the last couple months when they've been in lockdown here. The old adage, print is not dead. Folks, we're all glued to our screens. We're on 12 Zoom calls a day. We're Zoom meetings a day. We are on our phones, on our tablets, watching TV, doing all these things. People needed a break from that. You can see that a high number of people, 1/3 of these American travelers, were actually looking at traditional type of media like magazine articles on travel and so forth. Short online videos, of course, travel shows, guidebooks, all these things were really great. And of course, virtual tours were becoming a relatively new thing. And so you see that coming on the radar for people. So again, putting that content out there, absolutely the right thing to do. So looking ahead to travel again, when it is okay to travel again, we were asking these travelers, we've asked the question a couple times already, what kind of information or cues are you looking for to indicate to you that it's safe to you for you to plan and to travel and to get out there again? And you can see overwhelmingly that the most important cue for them is the official advice from the highest level of federal government health authorities, the CDC or Centers for Disease, the Centers for Disease Control, Dr. Fauci, Dr. Birx, the Surgeon General, et cetera, talking to us and telling us that it's okay to resume non-essential travel and how to go about doing that. As you can see, that's way ahead of elected officials, legislators, et cetera, and way ahead of local, state and local officials. in there. Interestingly enough, we heard anecdotally that people were saying, well, when Disneyland reopens, that's going to be my cue. As you can see, not really very impactful there. And at the very bottom there are travel deals. While people are looking for travel deals for future travel, that is not their cue to begin traveling and get out and about again. Well, of course, we had to ask, as we got in early May, we said, okay, it's time to ask that question. What's the first trip you're planning to take in the next 6 months? And what do you know? Visiting friends and relatives, overwhelmingly. As you can see, almost half, a little over 40% of Americans were saying, I'm going to go see friends and relatives first. And it's going to be by car. It's going to be, and probably by car. And about half of them said it's going to be a short drive within 200 miles. And half said it's going to be a little longer than it's going to be longer than 200 miles in there. People feeling safe in their car. It's a controlled environment. They know it. They've cleaned it. They know who's been in it. And so not surprising there. Airplanes, as you can see, plane travel to see friends and relatives, as you can see, was third on the list. And then after visiting friends and relatives, it was taking that first getaway, not to visit friends and relatives. Me and my wife, for example, could get away for a long weekend or vacation and so forth there. We were very encouraged in that these folks, only 8% were telling us they weren't planning to travel in the next 6 months. So that's really fantastic there. Again, if you represent a regional drive market, et cetera, understand that this is going to be happening on a local to regional level first before we begin the national travel. Again, we then, as we got to the Memorial Day weekend, we started asking the question of what's the first trip travelers are going to take. We asked the question, are you going to travel in the next 6 weeks? And for those who said yes, we asked them, what is that first trip they're going to take in the next 6 weeks? As you can see, about 40% of American travelers said they're not planning to travel that fast there, but that also means that almost half of the traveling Americans were indeed going to travel somewhere in the next 6 weeks. That's basically between now and just after July 4th. So that's very, very encouraging. But again, look at the type of travel. Let's not read too much into this. They're not taking week-long beach vacations for the most part of that. They're going to go get in the car, go see friends and relatives. A lot of that, you see 9% are what we call the staycations, which is basically a regional day trip, right? They're ending up at home at the end of the day. They're not spending overnight accommodations, but they are getting out in the community and they will be spending money there. So that's very encouraging. We ask about perceptions of safety and travel. So we're also talking to these folks as residents. And this will be a very important factor as we look at recovery and when and how fast recovery will happen. What you will see, the last few weeks we've been asking these three questions to our audience, and what you will see, and this has been a pretty steady pattern, is that we have a very divided country on the issue of safety and travel. The very first one on the top there, you can see I support opening up. We ask people how strongly they agree or disagree with the statement. I support opening up my community to visitors. And you got about 40% this past week who said that they agree or strongly agree that they should open up the community to visitors, where at the same time you've got about almost a third that are disagreeing with that or strongly disagreeing with that, and almost a third that are divided. Of these folks, we also said, or we also asked them how they feel about safety traveling outside their community. Well, many of these were traveling Americans, so they really felt a little stronger about feeling safe to travel outside their community. But as you can see, almost a third are kind of on the fence, and again, about almost 30% are against. So still a strong division, and not surprising when we asked that third question. Just saying, as a resident, would you feel safe dining in your local restaurants and shopping in your retail stores or community? Now keep in mind, not everybody lives in a destination where the restaurants and retail have reopened yet, but you do see that same type of division happening once again there. And it's going to be hard to see this level of growth and support to welcome back visitors to our destinations, or to people feel free to feeling safe traveling outside of destinations if they don't even feel safe yet going to their local restaurant or they're shopping in their local retail store when they can do it. So that's something that we're going to have to watch very, very carefully. Okay, and again, we've been asking these questions for the last several weeks, and you can see the good news is there's been a upward directional uptick in those supporting opening up community to visitors, and I think that's reflective of the fact that before Memorial Day weekend, a lot of communities opened back up with the retail and dining and so forth, and so people started dipping their toe in the water, and perhaps there's a little more initial comfort from that. In terms of traveling outside their community, it's been relatively flat the last couple of weeks. Again, I think the next couple of weeks are going to be more telling about where this one goes. And in terms of dining in the community, similar pattern there, and it really speaks to the kind of fear that people are experiencing in there. So let's talk about a few key takeaways from all of this. What do you do about this? Well, first of all, if you're in the travel and tourism industry, you have to understand, I think that's becoming pretty widely understood now, that recovery will begin at home. As different states, different parts of the country are reopening in different degrees, in different phases wherever you're located, the core audience is going to be initially getting your local residents moving within the community again, spending money within the community, dipping their toes in the water, so to speak, in terms of going to restaurants and shopping, etc. Then it's going to be the regional day trip travel, and then it's going to be that overnight getaway for a night or two, and then it might be that longer haul trip abroad. And of course, last but not least, it will be international travel, because the borders are for the most part closed to international, non-essential travel. So again, I can't stress enough, regional drive markets first. Those destinations that are already primarily regional drive market destinations will probably fare better initially than the traditional long haul or more international global destinations. For those of you who have feeder audiences that are both near and far, you want to revamp your marketing plans to address those regional markets first, the regional feeder markets. It's going to be different kind of messaging from close in than to farther out, at least in the first phases. Third point, no matter what, resist the urge to deep discount. This is a health issue. You cannot discount your way into recovery. You saw that in a slide I showed earlier for cues that people were looking for when it was safe for them to be safe to travel again. And the very bottom of the list was deals and discounts, very, very small percentage there. In past crises, our industry has often kind of resorted into slash and burn type of pricing, especially in the lodging sector, just to try to drive some business to their doorsteps and so forth. Well, and then what have they learned from that? Like, time and again, it takes a long time to recover that rate that you gave away. But that was an economic crisis. This is a health crisis first. And yes, there's an economic fallout to it, but right now it's currently a health crisis first. So it's not about discounting in there. And as I showed you, there's a lot of pent up demand. People want to get away. So when they feel safe to get away, if you're demonstrating to them that you have a safe, clean environment, they will pay the rate to get there, whatever tier of, attraction or accommodation or whatever the budget level is, that's commensurate with that in there. The fear factor is real. There is that huge pent-up demand, that ball of pent-up demand I keep talking to you about. Well, it's running straight into a wall of fear. That's what's happening. People are seeing that fear of travel. They are, as you saw, they're deeply divided on whether it's safe or not to welcome visitors, to go to my own restaurants in my own backyard, and so forth. The consumer has to overcome that fear if we are going to see a proper recovery in there. And again, we have to be mindful that we can't rush the health issue along. We have to be respectful and mindful of what the health authorities are telling us and work with that messaging there. So bottom line, what does that all mean? It means engagement. It means every business in this travel and tourism industry is going to have to engage more than ever before. And it's not just engaging their customers and their target audiences, it's engaging the residents, the partners, local businesses, etc. In there. You're going to have to, because you saw residents are divided over even whether or not it's good to have these visitors coming back in. Are they going to, are these visitors coming to our community going to create a second surge? Are they going to, are they going to spread the virus, coronavirus here throughout our communities? And that you're going to have to demonstrate to them that as a business in that community, you are following the best practices and you're asking your visitors and your guests to follow those best practices. Same thing with partners and local businesses. We're all going to have to police each other. There's some communities that you've seen that are reopened. You've seen those. You've seen it. You've all seen it in the news. There are some businesses that are following the social distancing guidelines, that are requiring customers to wear masks where appropriate, and so on and so forth. And then they might have a competitor or neighbor who's not, just on principle for whatever reason. Well, know that if you get the perception as being a destination that's not being that safe, or not taking the precautions, or not following best practices, that's going to create a black eye. And guess what? There'll be a competing destination or business that's going to be very, very happy to demonstrate that they're doing the right things. And that's going to be important in terms of engagement. And of course, to the visitors, many communities, I've seen many destinations already start local business pledges. Savannah, Georgia was one of the first ones, with Savannah Safe pledge. I'm here in Columbus, Ohio. There's a Live Forward pledge. There's many of these pledges where local businesses are signing up to adhere to, these certain required minimum standards for safe practices of engaging in business within their communities, within whatever the guidelines are in there, and making that commitment both to the residents and to their visitors. Well, these destinations also are now starting to ask the visitors to take a pledge, to also, they're on their websites, on your website, make it clear what is the expectation of your guests, your customers, your visitors to come in here, what they can expect of that experience. Will they be expected to have a temperature taken? Are you expecting them to wear a mask, and so forth? Tell them what you're doing to make their experience safe, but also make sure you inform them as to what you are going to ask of them to help make sure that your employees, your team members, and most importantly, your community also remain safe, so that you can continue to offer these great experiences to folks under these unique conditions that we're in now. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it. For more information, if you want to follow our research every week, I said every Tuesday morning we release the latest wave, longwoodsinternational.com/news. Our sponsors and the Miles Partnership have a great resource page with this data and other tips and other relevant data you can follow along. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to my friend Scott and let him fire away with any questions. Or if you have any questions from the audience, please don't hesitate to ask.
And just to let everyone know, we're going to send this information to you via a recap email with a video and Amir's contact information. So we'll get to that after this presentation. So, all right, let's start off with, I think you scared a lot of international destinations via the questions that we got. But we want to kind of just overall address a few of the questions. So this data is from the US travelers, correct?
Yes, this is only only surveying American travelers here.
Gotcha. So do you think the same mindset might be applicable to non-US travelers? Like the drive market first, the local regions, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, it depends from country to country, right? Because every country has handled this health crisis in a different way in terms of to what degree they've locked down. I mean, you have on the one hand, Italy, for example, that went into total lockdown, where then you had Sweden that said, you know what, we're not going to lock down. We're going to have the more, a different approach to this. It really depends from country to country. We've seen some data from other markets. And looking at things in reverse to where we're sitting here in the U.S. And same thing. It is about the same patterns emerge in terms of consumer a divided country on is it safe to travel? Is it safe to welcome visitors there? You see countries in Europe that are experimenting with what they're calling travel bubbles, where you have agreements between certain countries or certain regions to limit travel only within those areas because they feel that they've all handled the virus in similar ways that were effective or impactful, and that their citizens seem to be adhering to whatever the accepted guidelines are. So yeah, I mean I think the patterns will be similar. To what extent or degree is going to vary from market to market.
Okay. So you mentioned the metric of the 3% planning for international travel in this next 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any historical comparison data?
No, we started this travel sentiment, as soon as the crisis was hitting here. So I don't have anything that, this was in response to the emerging crisis. I don't have an ongoing benchmark that I could go back to historical years. But again, that's reflective. Keep in mind, you're not going to see a spike in that as long as the borders remain closed to non-essential travel. Even to, some of our closest neighbors and biggest feeder markets here in the U.S. Canada. I think they extended. I think last week they announced they extended the border closed to non-essential travel for another 30 days. So it's hard for people to. A lot of those travelers, you saw the trend lines about changing plans from international to domestic. A lot of people initially were just kind of, okay, well, I'll push my trip to Europe back in a month. And then okay, I'll push it back another month. And after the second or third time, they put it back like, you know what? I'm canceling, I'm going on hold, I'm pausing. And once I hear the borders are reopening, then I'll start planning that trip again.
So you mentioned a lot of these safety protocols and these pledges.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any more for those for our audience? I think those really good points.
Yeah, most destinations, whether the city, state, regions, et cetera, or national stations, they all have some type of local convention and visitors bureau, tourism board, et cetera, and they usually have robust websites with a lot of great information. And one common factor I've seen in almost every destination website since the beginning of the crisis is there is some link or some page that's gone up with the local health and safety information protocols for that destination. If you're planning a trip, I always tell everybody kind of, make sure you know before you go, right? It's that old saying. So look at that. It'll kind of tell you what what's required in that destination if you're going to visit it. First of all, are they even open for visitors from the outside, and so forth. And somewhere on those home pages of those websites or on those resources, those communities that have done those pledges are there. So I'll use the Savannah Safe example because we do some work with them, and they have there's literally over 600 businesses listed that have, and it tells you exactly what the criteria that, that their employees are wearing masks, they're adhering to extra cleaning protocols, and there's about half a dozen different things that they're all committed to, and that they're going to be doing. And at the same time, there's also a pledge part there for the visitor saying, we would love to welcome you back in our community. All we ask is that, you wear a mask, please wash your hands, and if you're not feeling well, schedule your trip another time. This is some very common sense, practical things. But that's reassuring that every relationship, whether it's a trip experience or a business relationship and so forth, it involves a certain matter of trust, right? If I'm coming to visit your destination, I trust that you're going to do everything you can to keep me safe and healthy. You can't control everything, but the things that are within your control, you're gonna do your best to provide me a great experience. And myself as the owner or operator, I'm also going to trust that you're going to do everything you can to not endanger myself and my staff, and so forth. So I think it's a win-win for those communities that are doing these things. And I've seen literally dozens upon dozens of destinations emerge with these types of business community pledges in the last few weeks.
And two of our viewers, Laurie and Joe, have shared in our chat box, both one from Portugal, so one international, one from Anchorage. So hey, we got some great examples here. Folks can click on those and check them out just in case you need to help your local tourism board get on the same page. We had an earlier question, and so what are your projections forecasts for travel demand with economic impact if recession increases in 2020?
Well, we're not economists, so I don't have any economic models to refer to. We're survey researchers, but I think as the fear, we asked the questions about what factors will most greatly impact your travel in the next 6 months, and obviously the fear of COVID is the highest, and then the economic concerns keep hovering somewhere in the low 20s in terms of percentage. I think as the fear of COVID subsides, as we get more significantly below 50%. We've kind of crossed a great threshold with getting below 50%. But as we get significantly lower, I think the economic concern will rise. And then maybe we can look back and, this is uncharted waters, as everybody says. We've never had a health crisis on this magnitude impact the travel and tourism industry globally as a whole, and especially here in this country, in the U.S. But when the economic concern outweighs the fear of the pandemic, then we might go look to some of the patterns that we've seen before, whether it was the Great Recession, in around 2008, 2009, whether it was the recession right after 9/11, or whether it was like the tech bubble burst, where we've seen, things kind of bottom out and then a quick resumption, kind of a quick rise back from a travel industry perspective in there. That's why I'm cautioning folks not to give away rate right now. Be very, very careful in terms of discounting too much, because it'll be really, really hard to get that back. People want to travel. It's not that people don't want to travel. It's that people cannot travel in many cases right now, or not travel the way they want to travel right now in there. So it's the crystal ball is cloudy. I have a lot of friends that are economists, and when we get together, they all agree the crystal ball is very cloudy right now.
A lot of people are, there's a few questions here that specifically are targeting the audience of your survey, right? They're Joe talks about, this adventure traveler. They're probably more prone to take more risks because they're an adventure travelist, and they'll probably travel, and I think that's a good point. So that brings me back to the audience for the survey. Mm-hmm. Did I miss it at the beginning? Did you talk about the breakdown?
Yeah, so it's 1,000. Yeah, I showed it right in the beginning of the presentation there. Every week we're surveying 1,000 U.S. 1,000 Americans, cross-section representative sample, weighted by to match census data of
okay.
across the U.S. in there. It's only 1,000 samples, so we wouldn't have significant enough segments so we could segment out adventure travelers versus cultural travelers and so forth. Generationally, we can look at things. Obviously those that are again, probably pretty intuitive, but the data shows that the younger you are, the more fearless you are about traveling right now, the more optimistic you are about getting out there. Whereas those who might be older demographics, especially those who are families and so forth, a little more cautious in their approach to travel.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, because if driving around is in going to see your family is number one, the younger generation isn't as into that as the older generation, who are say, okay, let's go visit our family who are local and close.
Right. And keep in mind, a lot of that visiting friends and relatives, not only have we been disconnected from our families for many of us for about 3 months, but we also missed a lot of milestones, right? This hit just the spring break season was starting, right? So we may have missed our spring break. We may have missed Mother's Day, Easter, graduations now, in there. So now it's like, darn, that's why we're craving to get together with the people we care about the most right now, because we miss those milestones. We kind of feel robbed about it, and by golly, we're going to have a heck of a party when we can get together.
Absolutely. I think it's both discouraging and encouraging at the same exact time. The data definitely shows. I think everyone assumed that staycations were going to be large. They assumed that more car travel was going to be big too, and I think this just really cemented those sentiments overall. So unfortunately we don't have any more questions, but if I'll pause for a couple of seconds and let if anyone else put any more questions in there. But I do want to thank you for your time today. It is almost 1:45, so we got 15 more minutes, but if there's no more questions, we can just wrap it up. As I mentioned, we will be sending this an email to everyone that is has registered for the whole series. And like I said, this is our final of our 4, and we're very excited that this is a great way to end it, to talk about how the actual audience is going to react to travel in the next 6 months per se. So we will include Amir's information in there. The deck will have a link to all the videos of the past presentations that we had. And you can visit our website at thedestinationshow.com. And that is thedestinationshow.com, and watch the videos of, we covered social media, we covered overall marketing for destinations, and now we just covered the audience. So I think we've done hopefully a solid to our audience, and we hopefully everyone appreciates the opportunity. Oh, see, I know if I pause long enough and throw a bunch of chatter in there, someone asks an additional question. So Josh asks us, you mentioned several times that the international travel will be last to open up. Any indicators at all as to when? Just the health authorities in those destinations like the CDC here? So he's asking.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is going to take a collaboration between our health and governmental officials on both sides of the borders for whatever countries we're talking about, right? In there. So yeah, can't project when that's going to happen, but it's going to have to be a mutual. It's a couple things. It's when the perceptions are that allowing non-essential travel from between two countries is not going to create an influx of the disease, and B, it's also probably going to open up in the order of those countries that deemed each other to have handled this crisis properly, right? So if I'll just use the U.S. perspective for a minute. And again, I'm not a government or health official, so I can't speak to what their process or policy is going to be. But logic would bear that if we are looking at opening up international borders for non-essential travel with company A, which maybe have had relatively low incidence of the coronavirus, lock down things pretty quickly, flatten the curve immediately, they've seen declining, significant declines in new cases, et cetera, versus country B, which may have gone through a tremendous surge and has continued to, see high volumes, but maybe declining, but not as near as a level of another, of country A. You're probably going to expect to see country A and the U.S. reopen their borders first. But country A also has to have the same feeling about us, right? So it's a two-way street. So yeah, this is going to be obviously on a country-by-country basis, on a case-by-case basis. That's why the international part is going to be much more complicated. Here in the U.S., it's complicated enough because various states have reopened, are reopening at various things. The Northeast is still very much locked down compared to the Southeast U.S. And California and Texas are two very, very different stages of how they reopen and so forth. But we all know that but you can kind of see, that there's a common area direction they're all moving in, at their own paces. The international factor, there's 3 more layers of complexity to that.
Yeah, no, totally. Well, hey, Amir, thank you for your time. Great questions, everybody. If you've got more questions for Amir, his contact information will be in our email. Thank you, and it's been such a great opportunity to connect with everyone. Be safe, everyone. Travel will be back. It will be in a boost that no one else will be able to see. I kind of sound like the president. Well, it'll be tremendous. So, hey, thank you, everyone. Have a great, safe weekend, and we'll hopefully see everyone in the near future. Thank you.